You did something in the book that I would not have thought possible, which is your writing prompted me to have compassion for a mass shooter or a would-be mass shooter because you were talking about someone who was caught by police before he did something terrible with a trunk full of guns, and that he said he was such an outcast and that really described what it was like to be him. And then you said, we think of these shooters as loners, but they're actually just bad joiners. And I'm wondering, how can we help address that? I mean, when you think about loneliness, you think about it doesn't seem that the church writ large is really addressing this well.
Mhm.
How can we start to do that?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the book is about dehumanization and humanization. And we evolved to be surrounded by 150 people who would look out for us. And we feel safe when we're being watched. We need that kind of recognition. We need people to be seeing us, or else we feel existentially unsafe. And so if you're one of these young men in high school and no one knows you, and if you read the profiles of them case after case, they're just ghosts in high school. No one knows them. They have no friends. They're living in their own head. And then they feel when you're not seen, when you're rendered invisible by the world, you regard it as an injustice, which it is. And you want to lash out. You want to prove to the world you exist. And so what they do is they basically, with mass shooters, they're attempting to commit suicide in a way that will make them famous. They're so hungry for recognition, they're willing to end their life as long as somebody will know them and somebody will know they passed through this earth. And so their loneliness turns into meanness and ultimately into villainy. And when you're lonely, you also lose the ability at this extreme end to see other human beings for who they are, as ensouled creatures that they are. And you see them basically as objects. And there's a quote I have in the book. A French journalist was interviewing people who had committed the Rwandan genocide. And she's asking a guy who had killed his neighbor of 25 years with a machete one day, just killed him. And she said, what did he look like when you took the machete to his neck? And the guy said, he didn't have the same facial features as the guy who I'd lived next to for 25 years. His facial features went sort of blurry and blank. And that's literal dehumanization, is not seeing another human face. And that's, I think, what drives a lot of these mass shooters. And what we can do, well, we live in a world without as much social density as we had before. And so we used to, in my view, live in a world with extended families where we lived with lots of people all around us. We lived in smaller homes, so people were noticing what we were doing. There was way higher church and synagogue and mosque participation. So we were just surrounded by people. There was less privacy, but people were around observing. And it's just been a case after case after case. When you read into these mass shooters, in retrospect, somebody should have known. And often somebody did know. Often the family is warning the authorities, there's something wrong here with this person. They're pent up, they're filled with homicidal rage. And for some reason, even after all the shootings we've had, our society is not socially dense enough, and we're not looking out for each other enough, and we're not saying this is a dangerous situation, this is a bomb waiting to explode. And so it's shocking to me that after all these killings, we still have people who are homicidally lonely. And we're still sort of haven't filled in the social gaps so those people can just sit in their room and stew and stew and stew. And it's an indictment of our society and the lack of social connection, the lack of interrelationship. And sometimes I think, there are weak moments where I think, this is all because people aren't going to church. And that's an exaggeration. But you take the decline in church attendance, and suddenly you're seeing this loss of social connection, the loss of social capital. And you're just seeing a country where people are not hanging out. And even worse, one of the things that church enables you to do or encourages you to do is when, say, somebody loses a loved one, if they're in your church, you know what to do. Like you show up with a casserole. It's institutionalized. And now if you're just with friends, when you lose a loved one, your friends may not know what to do. And so if you're in a Jewish congregation, you lose a loved one, you sit Shiva, which means you basically go to a party for 7 nights after you lost your loved one. And that's not obvious that you've lost your spouse, so let's host a party for 7 nights. But it's a brilliant ritual because it gives you something to do. You're super busy because you got to take care of all these people. You got to have the casseroles. People come over. You're surrounded by people for the whole week. And the rule is you can either talk about the loved one or not talk about the loved one, but they're going to be there just around you. And I think these churches and synagogues and congregations have ritualized ways of dealing with loss and suffering and loneliness that mere friendship doesn't have because it's not institutionalized.